Sunday morning in Clarksville began with the ringing of the bells of St. Matthew's Church. At 7:45 a.m., Sarah Miller was already standing at the kitchen window, watching the first parishioners make their way to the snow-white building with its tall spire. The church was only 2 blocks from their home, a Victorian mansion from the 1920s with blue shutters and a well-kept garden. "Coffee's ready," she said, without turning around. Sarah always knew when Bruce entered the room. After 12 years of marriage, she had learned his every step, his every habit. At 40, Bruce Miller looked exactly what a small-town pastor should look like. Tall, with neatly trimmed brown hair and piercing hazel eyes. His handshake was firm, his smile engaging, and his voice had that special tone that made people stop and listen. "Thank you, dear." He kissed her on the cheek, took a mug, and sat down at the kitchen table. "Today will be a long day. After the service, we have a meeting of the committee for the construction of a new wing for the Sunday school. Then a meeting with the Thompsons about the baptism of their youngest daughter." Sarah nodded as she poured herself some tea. She preferred tea to coffee, which always annoyed Bruce a little, although he never said so directly. Instead, he would sometimes remark, "It's strange that a pastor's wife doesn't drink coffee like all normal Americans." He said it with a smile, as if he were joking, but Sarah sensed something else in his words. "And I'm on duty at the nursery today," she said. "Mrs. Henderson is sick and asked me to fill in for her for the whole day." Bruce looked up from his sermon notes. "Again?" "Sarah, you work there 3 days a week and are always filling in for someone. Maybe it's time to think about something more stable?" "I like working with children," she replied, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "And we could use the money." "Money?" Bruce put down his pen. "Sarah, we're fine financially. The church provides us with everything we need. I just think that a pastor's wife should devote more time to serving the community rather than babysitting other people's children." Sarah wanted to argue that working in the nursery was a ministry, but she kept quiet. In 12 years, she had learned to choose her battles, and Sunday morning before the service was not the right time for arguments. At 8:30, they left the house. Bruce carried his leather sermon folder, and Sarah carried a basket of homemade cookies for the post-service tea. They walked arm in arm down the sidewalk, and every parishioner they passed greeted them with special respect. "Good morning, Pastor Miller." "Good morning, Sarah." Mrs. Parker, an elderly widow who lived across the street from the church, waved to them from her porch. "Blessed Sunday, Mrs. Parker," Bruce replied, his voice filled with the special warmth he reserved for his interactions with parishioners. St. Matthew's Church was built in 1954 and could seat about 300 people. On a typical Sunday, about 250 parishioners gathered, an impressive number for a town with a population of 85,000. Bruce was proud of this. He often said that when he came here 8 years ago, the congregation numbered barely 150 people. Austin Kent, the church deacon and one of the most influential people in the community, was already waiting for Bruce in the sacristy. Austin was 50 years old, owned the largest construction company in the county, and was married to Linda, who ran the women's church circle. They had 3 grown children, all successful, all exemplary Christians. "Good morning, Bruce." Austin shook the pastor's hand firmly. "Sarah, you look beautiful as always." "Thank you, Austin." Sarah smiled, but noticed Bruce squeeze her hand a little harder. A small warning: don't linger, don't flirt, not even with a 50-year-old deacon who had been married for 27 years. "Austin wanted to discuss the plans for the new wing with you," Bruce said, releasing his wife's hand. "Sarah, dear, perhaps you could check that everything is ready for the service?" It was a gentle but clear indication to leave. Sarah nodded and left the sacristy, closing the door behind her. In the hallway, she paused for a second, listening to the muffled voices of the men. "The budget may be more than we originally planned. We need to approach sponsors from neighboring parishes. My company can offer a discount, but no more than 15%. Sarah went to the main hall of the church. Volunteers were already bustling about, arranging flowers and checking microphones. She joined them, laying out her cookies on the table in the foyer. "Sarah, dear." Linda Kent, Austin's wife, approached her. Linda was the model deacon's wife, always impeccably dressed, always ready to help, always up to date on the latest church news. "How are you? I heard you're filling in at the nursery today?" "Yes, Mrs. Henderson is sick." "You're so kind, always willing to help," Linda said, taking a cookie and biting off a piece. Delicious as always. You must give me the recipe. By the way, what does Bruce think about you working at the nursery? Austin always says that ministers' wives should be completely devoted to church ministry. "Bruce supports me," Sarah replied, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. The service began at 9 in the morning. Sarah sat in the front row, as befits a pastor's wife. Bruce preached about family values, the importance of honesty in marriage, and that a husband should love his wife as Christ loved the church. His voice was convincing, his words inspiring. The congregation listened with reverence. "The family is the foundation of our society," he said, his gaze resting on Sarah for a second. "When love and mutual respect reign in the family, when spouses support each other in everything, then the community becomes stronger." Sarah smiled as expected, but inside something tightened. Mutual respect, support in everything. She remembered the morning conversation about her work, remembered dozens of other small comments Bruce had made over the past few months. After the service, there was the traditional tea party. Parishioners crowded into the foyer, discussing the sermon, sharing news, and planning church events. Sarah poured tea and coffee, answered questions about cookie recipes, and listened to expressions of gratitude for your husband's wonderful sermon. Bruce was the center of attention, as usual. He discussed plans for new construction with a group of men, answered theological questions from teenagers, and comforted Mrs. Johnson, who was worried about her mother's illness. "Pastor Miller always knows what to say," one of the parishioners whispered to Sarah. "You are so lucky to have a husband like that." "Yes," Sarah replied, "very lucky." By 1 o'clock, the main crowd had dispersed, leaving only the members of the building committee. Sarah began clearing the tables when Bruce approached her. "Honey, you can go home. We'll be here for a couple more hours. Austin has prepared a detailed estimate, and we need to discuss everything." "Okay," she said, placing the dirty cups in the basket. "What about dinner?" "Don't worry about me. If it takes too long, I'll grab something to eat here." Sarah nodded and headed for the exit. At the door, she turned around. Bruce was already sitting at the table with Austin and 3 other men, poring over papers. He looked completely absorbed in his work, and Sarah suddenly realized that she couldn't remember the last time she had seen him so engrossed at home with her. The walk home took 5 minutes. Sarah walked slowly, enjoying the sunny day. Neighbors were working in their gardens. Children were playing on the lawns. Clarksville on a Sunday looked like a picture postcard, a peaceful, prosperous American town where everyone knows each other and nothing bad ever happens. At home, Sarah changed into comfortable clothes and decided to do some laundry. In the laundry basket was the shirt Bruce had worn on Friday. She picked it up to check the pockets before washing it and found a receipt from a restaurant. Olive Garden, Riverside. The date was Friday, 3 days ago. The amount was $47.85. Dinner for 2. Sarah stood with the check in her hands, trying to remember. On Friday, Bruce said he was going to Riverside for a pastor's conference and would be back late. She didn't wait up for him and went to bed at 10. He came home around midnight, and she woke up when he took a shower. But why would he have dinner for 2 at a pastor's conference? And why had he never shared any details about these conferences? Bruce usually enjoyed sharing new ideas, interesting speeches, and useful contacts. Sarah folded the check in half and slipped it into her jeans pocket. Maybe he had dinner with another pastor. Maybe he discussed some church business. Maybe she was just imagining things. But she couldn't get that check out of her head for the rest of the day. Monday began with rain. Sarah woke up at 6 in the morning to the sound of raindrops on the roof and found that Bruce was already up. She found him in his study, leaning over his computer with a cup of coffee in his hand. "Good morning," she said, peering over his shoulder. His email was open on the screen. "Something urgent?" Bruce quickly closed the browser window. "Just answering some emails from parishioners. Nothing important." He turned to her with a smile, but Sarah noticed the tension in his voice. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep because of the rain," she said, sitting down on the armrest of his chair. "Maybe we could have breakfast together?" "I don't have to be at work until 10. Unfortunately, that won't work. I have to go to the diocese for an urgent meeting about new programs for young people. I'll be busy all day." Sarah frowned. "On Monday? Usually these meetings are held in the middle of the week." "Well, apparently they decided to change the schedule," Bruce said, already getting up and closing his laptop. "Honey, could you wash my gray suit? Tomorrow I have an important meeting with potential sponsors for our construction project." "Of course," Sarah nodded. But something about his behavior alarmed her. Bruce was avoiding her gaze, which was unlike him. After her husband left, Sarah made herself breakfast and sat down with a cup of tea by the kitchen window. The rain intensified, turning into a real downpour. She took the check she had found yesterday out of her jeans pocket and studied it carefully once more. Olive Garden, Riverside. Friday, 3 p.m. 2 entrees, salad, dessert, 2 glasses of wine. Clearly a dinner for 2. But who could have been with Bruce? And why hadn't he told her about it? Sarah picked up the phone and dialed the parish number. After a few rings, the secretary, Mrs. Thompson, whom Sarah had known for several years, answered. "St. Paul's Parish, good morning." "Hello, Mrs. Thompson. This is Sarah Miller. I wanted to confirm my husband's appointment time for today. He forgot to write down the exact time." "Oh, hello, dear. But we don't have any meetings scheduled for today. The next pastor's meeting isn't until Thursday." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. Could it be something urgent? A meeting about youth programs? No, definitely not. "I keep the entire calendar, and today we only have administrative matters. Maybe your husband went to another parish?" "Yes, I must have gotten confused." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson." Sarah hung up the phone with trembling hands. Bruce had lied to her. For the first time in 12 years of marriage, she had caught him in a blatant lie. Where had he really gone? And why did he lie? The day at the nursery school passed in a blur. Sarah mechanically played with the children, read them stories, and helped them during lunch, but her thoughts were far away. She tried to remember if there had been any other strange behavior from Bruce lately. Indeed, his trips had become more frequent. He used to leave town maybe once a month, but now it was almost every week. Pastoral conferences, meetings with colleagues, spiritual seminars. Sarah never doubted these explanations. Why would her husband lie? Another oddity was money. With the pastor's stable salary and her small income from working at the kindergarten, they always had enough for everything they needed. But in recent months, Bruce had been mentioning more and more often that they needed to save money and that times were tough. He even suggested that she quit her job to focus on church ministry. But wouldn't the extra income help them? Bruce returned home at his usual time in the evening, around 7. He looked a little tired, but satisfied. "How was the meeting?" Sarah asked as she served dinner. "Productive. We discussed new approaches to working with young people. I think some of the ideas could be applied in our church." "That's good." Sarah tried to sound normal. "Who else was at the meeting?" Bruce froze for a second with his fork in his hand. "Pastor Davison from Springfield, Pastor Wilson from Maplewood, and a few other colleagues. Quite a representative group." The lies flowed so naturally from him that Sarah felt nauseous. She lowered her eyes to her plate, afraid that her face would betray her suspicions. "Sarah, you seem strange today," Bruce remarked. "Is something wrong?" "No, everything's fine. I'm just tired. I had a difficult day at the nursery." "I told you that job takes too much out of you," Bruce said, his voice taking on its usual tone of superiority. A pastor's wife should be a source of inspiration for the community, not a tired nanny. Bruce, I like my job. But think about your priorities, dear. The church needs your talents. You could lead a women's group, organize charity events, help young families. That's real ministry. Sarah felt the familiar irritation that increasingly arose during such conversations. Helping children is also ministry. Of course, but not for you. You have a different mission. Bruce put his hand on her shoulder, and this gesture, which had once seemed loving, now felt like pressure. I'm saying this out of love for you, Sarah. You're wasting your potential. What if I don't want to quit my job? Bruce's face changed. His smile became colder, and his eyes narrowed. Then I'll have to reconsider some things. Perhaps we should think about transferring you to homeschooling and cooking and needlework. Real pastors' wives have mastered these skills. What do you mean? I can talk to the director of the nursery school. Explain that you have new responsibilities at the church. I'm sure she'll understand. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Are you going to fire me without my consent? I'm going to help you make the right decision, Bruce said, getting up from the table. Think about it, dear. You have until Sunday. He left the kitchen, leaving Sarah alone with her plate of cold dinner. She sat motionless, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Bruce had essentially threatened her. Gently, politely, but it was a threat nonetheless. Either she would voluntarily leave her job, or he would force her to do so. The next day, Sarah decided to talk to Linda Kent. If anyone could give her advice on how to be the wife of a church leader, it was the wife of a deacon with 27 years of experience. They met at a cafe on Clarksville's main street. Linda looked impeccable as always. Neat hair, elegant dress, subtle makeup. She ordered a salad and mineral water. Sarah ordered coffee and a sandwich. "How are you, dear?" Linda asked, studying the menu. "You look a little tired." "Linda, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Has Austin ever objected to your decisions? I mean, your job, your hobbies, anything like that?" Linda put down the menu and looked at Sarah intently. "What's going on?" "Bruce wants me to quit the nursery school. He says it's not a suitable job for a pastor's wife." "And what do you think about that?" "I don't want to quit. I enjoy working with children, and we need the money." Linda paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sarah, marriage is a compromise, especially marriage to someone who serves the church. We have certain obligations to the community, but it's my life too." "Yes, but think about the big picture. Bruce's reputation, the opinion of the congregation, family unity. All of that is more important than personal desires." Sarah felt disappointed. She had hoped for support, but instead received a lecture on the duties of a pastor's wife. "Linda, has Austin ever lied to you?" "Lied?" Linda frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Just curious. Are there secrets between spouses in marriages like ours?" "Sarah, you're worrying me. What's going on between you and Bruce?" "Nothing special. Sometimes I just feel like I don't know him very well." Linda leaned across the table and lowered her voice. "Honey, all marriages go through difficult periods. It's important to remember that our husbands have a lot of responsibility. Sometimes they have to make decisions that we may not understand right away. Our job is to trust them." After meeting with Linda, Sarah felt even more alone. Even the only woman who could understand her was on the side of the husbands. That evening, Bruce announced that he was going on another business trip tomorrow. "Where this time?" Sarah asked. "Richmond. There's a seminar on financial planning for churches, a very useful topic considering our construction project." "How many days?" "Just one night. I'll be back Thursday at lunchtime." Sarah nodded, but a plan was already forming in her mind. If Bruce was lying to her again, she had to find out, and maybe she would finally understand what was happening to her marriage. On Wednesday morning, she walked her husband to his car, kissed him goodbye, and waved until he disappeared around the corner. Then she went back into the house, picked up the phone, and started making calls. Richmond Conference Center, Marriott Hotel, St. John's Parish. There were no financial planning seminars scheduled anywhere. During her lunch break, Sarah drove to a gas station on the outskirts of town where Mike Thompson, the husband of one of the parishioners, worked. He was a friendly guy, always willing to help. "Hi, Sarah. What brings you to our neck of the woods?" "Hi, Mike. Listen, I have a strange request. Can you check if my husband filled up here this morning? He left on a business trip but forgot his credit card at home, and I'm worried he doesn't have enough cash." Mike checked the morning's records. "No, Pastor Miller didn't fill up today. He was here yesterday around 7 p.m., but I haven't seen him today." "I see. Thanks, Mike." Sarah drove home slowly, digesting the information. Bruce had filled up last night, even though he said he would only leave in the morning. That meant he could have left last night. But then, why pretend to leave in the morning? At home, she went into Bruce's study. She didn't usually go in there, it was his personal space. But today, everything had changed. On the desk were bills she hadn't seen before. The cell phone bill showed numerous calls to Riverside. The credit card statement contained purchases at stores and restaurants that Bruce had never told her about. But the most shocking discovery was a photograph she found in one of the desk drawers. It was of Bruce hugging a young woman with dark hair. An 8-year-old boy was standing next to them. All three were smiling at the camera, looking like a happy family. On the back of the photo was an inscription, "Christiana and Jacob, Summer 2024. Sarah sank into her husband's chair, holding the photo with trembling hands. Who was Christiana? And who was this child? Why did they look as if Bruce was part of their family? Suddenly, everything fell into place. The trips to Riverside, dinners for two, false explanations for business trips, financial problems despite a stable income. Her husband had another life, maybe even another family. Thursday passed in agonizing anticipation. Sarah couldn't concentrate on her work at the nursery, constantly thinking about the photo she had found. She hid it in her purse, periodically taking it out and staring at the faces of strangers who seemed to know her husband better than she did. Bruce returned as promised for dinner on Thursday. He looked rested and content, talking over dinner about a useful seminar and new acquaintances with colleagues. Sarah listened to him, studying every facial expression, every intonation. How could she have failed to notice for so long that he was lying? "Honey, you seem distracted again," Bruce remarked, putting down his fork. "Maybe you really should take a vacation. Working at the nursery is clearly too exhausting for you." "I'm fine," Sarah replied, trying to sound calm. "I'm just thinking about Sunday service. You wanted me to be more involved in church life." Bruce smiled, clearly pleased with her answer. "See, I told you you had your priorities straight. Maybe you could take charge of organizing the charity dinner next month?" "Of course," Sarah nodded, although her thoughts were elsewhere. She had already decided that she would go to Riverside next Saturday. If Bruce really had another life there, she had to see it with her own eyes. Friday dragged on endlessly. Sarah struggled to perform her duties at the nursery, constantly distracted by her plans for the trip. She had never spied on her husband before, and the very thought of it filled her with a mixture of shame and determination. In the evening, Bruce was working in his study on his Sunday sermon, as usual. Sarah took advantage of this to study the photo again carefully. The woman looked about 30, beautiful, with long, dark hair and a friendly smile. The boy was a carbon copy of Bruce as a child. Sarah had seen childhood photos of her husband at his mother's house. The question that tormented her most was, did this Christiana know about Sarah's existence? Did she consider herself Bruce's real wife? And what did that mean for their 12-year marriage? On Saturday morning, Sarah told Bruce she was going to visit her sister in the neighboring county. It was a half-truth. Her sister did live there, although Sarah had no plans to visit her. "Great, honey. Have a good day." Bruce said, without looking up from his newspaper. "I'll get ready for tomorrow's service." Sarah took her car and drove out of Clarksville toward Riverside. The 40-mile drive gave her time to think about what she was going to do. She didn't have a clear plan, just get to the city and then what? Search for Christian in every store and cafe? It seemed like a hopeless endeavor. Riverside turned out to be a typical medium-sized American city, bigger than Clarksville, but not so big that she would get lost. Sarah drove down the main street, looking at the signs of shops and restaurants. Olive Garden was located in a shopping center on the outskirts of town. She parked at the entrance to the mall and went inside. Saturday was a busy day for shopping. Families with children, teenagers, and elderly couples crowded everywhere. Sarah wandered aimlessly between stores, not knowing what to look for. At Macy's, she was looking at dresses when she heard a familiar child's laughter. Turning around, she saw an 8-year-old boy playing hide-and-seek between the clothing racks. It was the same child from the photo, Jacob. "Jacob, don't run! Mommy can't keep up with you," a woman's voice called out. Sarah froze. The woman from the photo appeared from behind the blouse rack. Christina. She looked younger than in the photo and was dressed simply in jeans, a sweater, and sneakers. An ordinary mother shopping with her son. Sarah felt her heart pounding. Here she was, her husband's second life. But what should she do now? Approach them and introduce herself? Follow them discreetly? Christiana caught her son and gently stroked his head. "Let's pick out some new jeans for you, and then we'll go to J.C. Penney for a shirt for Daddy. He asked for something blue, Daddy. Jacob calls Bruce Daddy." Sarah followed them at a distance, trying not to attract attention. In the men's clothing department, Christiania spent a long time choosing between 2 blue shirts, consulting with her son. "Which one do you think Dad will like better?" she asked. "This one." The boy pointed to the darker shade shirt. "The same color as his eyes." Christian laughed. "You're right, baby." "Daddy has such beautiful eyes." Sarah turned away, feeling nauseous. This woman spoke of Bruce with such love, such tenderness, just as she herself had spoken of him before. As Christiane headed for the cash register, Sarah made up her mind. She walked over and stood in line next to her. "Excuse me," she said in a trembling voice. "Forgive my curiosity, but aren't you from Clarksville?" Christiane turned around in surprise. "No, we're locals." "Why?" "I just thought I'd seen you before. Maybe at church?" "Oh no." Christiania shook her head. "My son and I don't go to church very often. Although my husband..." She paused for a second. "My husband is a pretty religious guy." "I see." Sarah nodded, even though she didn't understand. "If Bruce doesn't go to church with them, how does he explain his profession?" "Does your husband work here in Riverside?" "Yes and no," Christiane smiled. "He has a rather unusual job. He travels a lot on business, consulting for various organizations. Sometimes he's away from home for several days, consulting for organizations." Sarah couldn't help but admire Bruce's ingenuity. Technically, he wasn't lying. The pastor did consult for church organizations. "It must be difficult when your husband is away so much," Sarah said cautiously. "It can be," Christian agreed. "But Bruce always calls, always tells me where he is and what he's doing. And when he's home, he devotes all his time to Jacob and me." Bruce. She called him Bruce, so he doesn't even hide his name. "Jacob, come here," Christian called to her son, who had wandered off to play with his toys. "We have to hurry. Daddy said he'd be home for dinner." Sarah felt the ground slip away from under her feet. Bruce was coming home for dinner. Today. And he told her he would be preparing for Sunday service. "Does your husband often come home on weekends?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "Almost every weekend," Christiana replied, paying for her purchases. "Weekends are our family time. We try to spend it together." When they left the store, Sarah followed them around the mall for a while. Christian bought groceries at Safeway, stopped by the pharmacy, and went to a toy store where she picked out a new construction set for Jacob. She behaved like a normal mother preparing for a family evening. At the exit of the mall, Sarah saw them get into an old Honda Accord. There was a child seat in the back and a family photo on the dashboard. Sarah followed where they went, keeping her distance. The house turned out to be a modest one-story building in a working-class neighborhood. There was a small yard, children's toys on the porch, and a mailbox with the name Johnson on it. Sarah parked across the street and watched as Christian and Jacob unloaded their groceries. This was a real family, not some fling or casual affair. Bruce had a second, complete family, where he was a husband and father. Sarah sat in the car, trying to make sense of what she had seen. How long had this been going on? Jacob was 8 years old, which meant Bruce had been leading a double life for at least 9 years. Almost their entire marriage had been a lie. Around 5 in the evening, Bruce's familiar car pulled up to the house. Sarah cowered in the driver's seat, afraid he would notice her. But Bruce was too focused on getting home as quickly as possible. He was greeted on the porch. Christiana kissed him. Jacob jumped into his arms. Sarah watched the scene with a painful sense of déjà vu. Bruce hugged her in exactly the same way when he returned from his business trips. The same tender gestures, the same smile. It turned out that he was simply switching between two families, playing the role of a loving husband and father in both. Through the windows of the house, she could see the family preparing dinner. Bruce was helping Christiane in the kitchen, and Jacob was showing him a new construction set. It was the usual family idyll that Sarah was deprived of every weekend. When it got dark, Sarah drove home. The trip took over an hour, and the whole time she tried to figure out what to do next. Confrontation was inevitable, but how could she prepare for it? How could she even talk to a man who had been leading her on for 9 years? At home, she found a note from Bruce. Running late at church, preparing a special sermon. Don't wait up for me for dinner. Love you. I love you. Sarah crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash can. How could he write those words after spending the day with another family? She went into her husband's office and began methodically examining the documents. Now that she knew what to look for, a lot of things became clearer. The cell phone bills showed daily calls to Riverside. Credit card statements showed purchases at children's stores, groceries, and utility bills for 2 addresses. In one of the drawers, she found documents that simply shocked her. Jacob Bruce Johnson's birth certificate. Father, Bruce Miller. Mother, Christiana Johnson. Bruce wasn't just living with another woman. He had a son, a legitimate son, whose paternity he had officially acknowledged. Sarah sank into a chair, holding the document in her hands. So while she was dreaming of children, while she and Bruce were putting off pregnancy until better times, he already had a child with another woman. She found a few more photos in the closet. Bruce teaching Jacob to ride a bike. Bruce and Christiane at a picnic. The boy's birthday. Bruce cutting the cake, surrounded by his happy family. One of the photos had a note on the back. Jacob's first day of school, September 2023. Sarah remembered that day. Bruce said he had an important meeting with the bishop, and she spent the whole day alone, worrying that her husband was nervous about work. Suddenly, she heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Sarah quickly put all the documents and photos back, turned off the light in the study, and went into the living room. When Bruce entered the house, she was sitting on the sofa with a book, trying to look calm. "Hi, honey." He kissed her on the forehead. "How was your day at your sister's?" "Fine," Sarah replied without looking up from her book. "How are your preparations for the service going?" "Productively. Tomorrow's sermon will be special. It's about the importance of honesty in family relationships." Sarah almost laughed at the cynicism of the situation. "Sounds interesting." "Sarah, I want to talk to you about working at the nursery." Bruce sat down next to her. "I've decided that after Sunday service, I'll announce to the congregation that you're taking on new responsibilities at the church. It will look like a natural progression of your ministry." "What if I don't agree?" "Honey, we've already discussed this. The decision has been made." Sarah finally looked up at her husband. This man controlled every aspect of her life, while living a complete lie himself. Tomorrow, after the service, she would tell him exactly what she thought of his honesty in family relationships. "Okay, Bruce," she said quietly. "Whatever you say." He smiled, pleased with her obedience, and went to take a shower. Sarah remained seated in the living room, planning tomorrow's conversation. She knew that after this confrontation, their lives would change forever. But she could no longer live a lie. Tomorrow, after Bruce delivered his sermon on honesty, she would tell him about her trip to Riverside, about Christian and Jacob, about how she knew the truth. Sunday morning began as usual. Sarah got up at 7, made breakfast, and woke Bruce. He was in a great mood. Today's sermon was clearly special to him. "Good morning, dear." He kissed her on the cheek as he sat down at the table. "It's a beautiful day for church." "Yes," Sarah replied, pouring him coffee. "You said the sermon would be about honesty in the family?" "Exactly. About how important it is to be honest with those you love. About how lies destroy trust and ultimately destroy relationships." Sarah almost laughed at the irony of the moment. Sounds very relevant. "I think the community needs to hear this. These days, too many people live double lives, hiding the truth from their families." "You're right." Sarah met his gaze. "Sooner or later, people like that get what they deserve." Something in her tone made Bruce frown slightly, but he didn't pursue it. The church service proceeded as usual. Sarah sat in the front row, listening to her husband speak with inspiration about the importance of honesty in marriage. The congregation listened attentively, many nodding in agreement. "When spouses hide things from each other," Bruce said from the pulpit, "it undermines the foundation of their union. Marriage must be built on absolute transparency and trust." Austin Kent, sitting in the second row with his wife, nodded approvingly. Sarah saw him whisper something to Linda, and she smiled. "Lies are poison for a family," Bruce continued. "Even a small untruth can grow into a huge problem that will destroy everything you have built over the years." After the service, there was the traditional tea party. The parishioners praised the sermon and said how important it was to hear these words. Sarah smiled and thanked them, even though inside she was boiling with anger. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the church was empty. Only Sarah, Bruce, and a few volunteers remained, cleaning up after the tea party. Bruce helped stack the tables in the church basement, where all the equipment for events was stored. "I'll go get the last chairs," he said to Sarah. "Can you wait for me downstairs?" Sarah went down to the basement. It was a spacious room under the main hall of the church, divided into several rooms. Furniture, church utensils, and document archives were stored here. In the far room stood an old piano that was once used for choir rehearsals. When Bruce came down with the chairs, Sarah was already waiting for him. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" Bruce put the chairs in the corner. Sarah took a photo she had found in his office out of her purse. Of Christian and Jacob. Bruce froze. His face changed instantly. The usual kindness disappeared, replaced by something cold and cruel. "Where did you get this?" "From your office. Along with all the other evidence of your double life." "Sarah, I can explain everything." 9 years, Bruce. 9 years you lied to me every day. You have a son who is 8 years old. While I was dreaming of children, you were raising a child with another woman. Bruce slowly approached her. "It's not what you think. I was in Riverside yesterday. I saw your house. I saw how you live as a family. I talked to Christiana at the mall. What have you done?" Bruce's voice took on a threatening tone. "What I should have done a long time ago. I found out the truth about my husband." "Sarah, you don't understand the situation. It's much more complicated than that." "Then explain it to me. Tell me how a pastor who preaches about honesty in marriage can cheat on his wife for 9 years. Bruce stopped a few steps away from her. His face was contorted with rage. "You shouldn't have gone there. You shouldn't have meddled in my affairs." "Your affairs? Bruce, I'm your wife." "You're a hindrance," he said, quietly but clearly. "You've always been a hindrance. Christian understands me, supports my decisions, doesn't ask unnecessary questions." "And what about me? 12 years of marriage mean nothing?" 12 years of mistakes." Bruce stepped toward the door. "I should have divorced you long ago." Sarah tried to walk past him to the door, but he blocked her way. "Where are you going?" "Home. To pack." "Our marriage is over, Bruce." "No." He grabbed her arm. "You're not going anywhere. You're not going to ruin my life. Let me go." What happened next happened very quickly. Bruce pushed Sarah into the far room of the basement, where there was an old piano. The door slammed behind them, and she heard the key turn in the lock. "Bruce! Open up right now!" She began banging on the door. "I need time to think," he replied from behind the door. "To decide what to do with you." Sarah tried to open the door, but it was locked from the outside. There were no windows in the room, only a dim light fixture on the ceiling. An old piano, a few boxes of books, a chair. "Bruce, this is crazy. Let me out." But there was no answer. She heard his footsteps receding down the basement hallway. A few hours later, Bruce returned home alone. Neighbors saw him calmly watering the garden and reading on the porch. When Mrs. Parker asked where Sarah was, he replied that she had gone to her sister's and would be staying there for a few days. On Monday morning, the concerned director called the nursery school. Sarah had not come to work and had not notified anyone of her absence. Bruce explained that his wife was dealing with a family situation and had taken a sudden vacation. On Tuesday, Linda Kent noticed that Sarah had not shown up for the weekly women's club meeting. Bruce said that Sarah was depressed and that her doctor had advised her to take a break from her social activities. By Wednesday, some parishioners were beginning to have questions. It was too strange that Sarah had disappeared without warning, without saying a word to anyone. On Thursday morning, a police car pulled up outside the Miller's house. Detective Jane Rodriguez, a 45-year-old woman with 20 years of experience, had received a report of a missing person. Rodriguez was an experienced investigator, known for her thoroughness and intuition. Divorced and childless, she was completely devoted to her work and had a reputation as a detective who never gave up. "Mr. Miller?" "Detective Rodriguez, Clarksville Police Department. Can I talk to you about your wife?" Bruce invited her into the house and offered her coffee. He looked worried but was in control. "When was the last time you saw your wife?" Rodriguez asked, taking out her notebook. "On Sunday after church. She said she was going to her sister's. She was having family problems." "What's her sister's name?" "Where does she live?" Bruce gave her the name and address. Rodriguez wrote down the information. "Did Sarah take any belongings with her?" "A few things. She said she would be there for a few days." "Have you spoken to her since Sunday?" "She called on Monday and said everything was fine." Not since then, Rodriguez studied Bruce's face closely. Something about his demeanor bothered her. He seemed too calm for a husband whose wife had been missing for 4 days. "Mr. Miller, were you and your wife having problems?" "No, not at all. We have a wonderful marriage. Ask any of our church members. We're a model family." "But she didn't tell you exactly when she would be back?" "Sarah is very devoted to her family. If her sister needs help, she can stay there for a long time." After talking to Bruce, Rodriguez went to Sarah's sister. She was extremely surprised by the police visit. "Sarah hasn't visited me in several months," she said, "and I don't have any family problems. What's going on?" Back at the station, Rodriguez began an official investigation into Sarah Miller's disappearance. She interviewed Sarah's colleagues at the nursery, several churchgoers, and neighbors. Everyone said the same thing. Sarah couldn't have disappeared without warning. "She's very responsible," said the kindergarten director. "She never missed work without a good reason. Sarah always let us know if she couldn't come to a meeting," said Linda Kent. "This isn't like her at all." Rodriguez checked Sarah's bank cards. No transactions since Monday. Her phone was not answering, and the last call was recorded on Sunday evening. By Friday, the detective was certain Sarah Miller had not left to visit her sister voluntarily. Something had happened to her on Sunday, and the last person to see her was her husband. Rodriguez returned to the Miller home with a search warrant. Friday, 10:30 a.m. Detective Rodriguez stood on the porch of the Miller's house with a search warrant and 2 officers. Bruce opened the door, looking calm, but she noticed the tension in his posture. "Mr. Miller, we have a warrant to search your home in connection with your wife's disappearance." "This must be some kind of mistake," Bruce said, looking at the document. "I explained that Sarah is at her sister's." "We checked. Her sister hasn't seen Sarah in months." For the first time all week, Bruce's expression faltered. Rodriguez noticed. The search of the house took 3 hours. In Bruce's office, the detectives found something that completely changed the direction of the investigation. Photos of another woman and child, financial documents showing expenses for a second household, phone bills with multiple calls to Riverside. "Mr. Miller, who is Christiana Johnson?" Rodriguez asked, showing him the photo. Bruce turned pale. "It's a complicated situation. Do you have a second family in Riverside?" A long pause. "Yes." "Did your wife know about it?" "She found out recently." "When exactly?" "On Sunday, after the service." Rodriguez felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. "What happened on Sunday after the service?" "We had a conversation. Sarah got upset and said she was leaving." "Mr. Miller, I don't think you're telling me the whole truth." At that moment, the station received a call from Austin Kent. The deacon said he was going to check the church basement, where equipment for tomorrow's church event was stored, and he noticed that one of the rooms was locked, even though all the rooms were usually open. Rodriguez immediately went to the church with a group of officers. Bruce was taken along to give a statement. At St. Matthew's Church, they were met by an agitated Austin Kent. "Detective, I don't understand what's going on here," he said. "The door to the back room is locked, and the key isn't in its usual place. And I heard some noises coming from there." Rodriguez's heart began to race. "Where exactly is this room?" Austin led them to the basement, to the back room with the piano. The door was indeed locked. When the detective put her ear to the door, she heard faint sounds of movement inside. "Sarah! Sarah Miller! It's the police!" Rodriguez shouted. "Help! I'm here!" came a faint but distinct female voice. The door was broken open with a crowbar. Sarah Miller was lying on the floor near an old piano. She was alive, but extremely weak. 5 days without proper food or water in a cold basement, tied up with ropes that she had managed to partially loosen. "An ambulance! Right now!" Rodriguez shouted. While the medics examined Sarah, the detective turned to Bruce, who was standing there pale as a sheet. "Bruce Miller, you are under arrest on suspicion of unlawful imprisonment and kidnapping." At the hospital, doctors diagnosed Sarah with dehydration, exhaustion, and multiple abrasions from the ropes. Physically, she was on the mend, but the psychological trauma was severe. "He said I had to disappear," Sarah told Detective Rodriguez the next day, "that I would ruin his life if I told the truth about his second family." "Did he threaten you?" "At first, he just locked me up and said he needed time to think. Then he came every day and brought me a little water and food. He said that if I promised to keep quiet and leave town, he would let me go." "And what did you say?" "That I wasn't going anywhere. That he had no right to treat me like that." Sarah paused. "Yesterday he said that if I didn't agree, he would tell everyone that I had gone crazy and left home, and that they would find me somewhere far away, and no one would believe my story." Rodriguez continued her investigation. The trip to Riverside confirmed all her suspicions. Christiana Johnson was shocked to learn that Bruce was married. "He told me he had been divorced for 3 years," she cried in an interview with the detective. "He showed me divorce papers and said his ex-wife had moved to another state." Jacob considers him his father. How long did your relationship last?
9 years. We met when I was 21. He was holding some kind of church conference in Riverside at the time. He said I was special, that God had brought him to me.
Did he give money for child support?
Of course. He rents a house for us and helps with expenses. I thought we were a real family.
A legal examination of the documents showed that the divorce papers Bruce showed Christiane were fake. On Monday, Bruce was formally charged with unlawful imprisonment, psychological abuse, fraud, and bigamy. At the pre-trial hearing, the prosecutor presented a complete picture of his crimes. The defendant deceived 2 women for 9 years, the prosecutor said. He created fake documents to convince the second victim that he was free. When his legal wife learned the truth, he imprisoned her in the church basement for 5 days, subjecting her to psychological pressure and threats. The judge set bail at $500,000. The church community was unable to pay it. Austin Kent, who could have helped financially, publicly refused. "I cannot support a man who has betrayed the trust of the community in this way," he told reporters. The news of Pastor Miller's arrest shocked Clarksville. Local media picked up the story, and it quickly spread across the state. "Pastor with double life arrested for imprisoning wife." Such headlines appeared in all the newspapers. St. Matthew's Church was temporarily closed. The diocese appointed a special commission to investigate Bruce's activities during his years of service. Parishioners were in shock. Many refused to believe what had happened. "He seemed so kind, so devoted to his family," Mrs. Parker told reporters. "How could we not have noticed?" Linda Kent was one of the few who supported Sarah. "I feel guilty for not seeing the signs," she admitted while visiting Sarah in the hospital. "When you asked me about secrets in marriage, I should have listened to you better." But Sarah was in no mood for reconciliation. 5 days in the basement had changed her. The trusting woman who had believed in her husband for 12 years no longer existed. "Everyone saw it, but no one said anything," she said. "Everyone considered our family to be exemplary, but I was alone in my own marriage." The psychologist who worked with Sarah explained that she would need long-term therapy to overcome the trauma. "Betrayal on this scale destroys the ability to trust," he said. "Sarah has to learn to trust people again, starting with herself." 2 weeks later, Sarah was discharged from the hospital. She moved in with her sister in a neighboring county, refusing to return to the home where she had lived for 12 years of lies. Detective Rodriguez visited her before the trial began. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "I survived," Sarah replied, "but the woman I was died in that basement." "Are you ready to testify in court?" "Yes. I want everyone to know the truth about who Bruce Miller really was. What about forgiveness? Many in your church say it's a Christian duty to forgive." Sarah shook her head. "I don't have to forgive a man who kept me tied up in a basement for 5 days, who lied to me every day for 9 years, who stole years of my life." The trial began 3 months later. Sarah gave detailed testimony about her imprisonment, about the years of psychological control, about how Bruce systematically isolated her from her friends and independence. Christiana Johnson also testified, recounting how Bruce had deceived her with fake divorce papers. The defense tried to portray the case as a complex family situation, but the evidence was irrefutable. Bruce received 8 years in prison for unlawful imprisonment, psychological abuse, and fraud. After the verdict, Sarah gave an interview to a local newspaper. "I want other women to know. If your partner controls your every move, isolates you from your work and friends, and systematically lies to you, that's not love," she said. "That's abuse. And no one should have to put up with it, even in the name of marriage." A year later, Sarah got a divorce, divided the property, and started a new life. She moved to another state where no one knew her story and got a job at a domestic violence shelter. St. Matthew's Church closed permanently. The building was sold, and the parishioners dispersed to other communities. Christiana Johnson reverted to her maiden name and moved to another city with her son. Jacob underwent therapy to cope with the loss of his father. Austin Kent told reporters, "We all learned to trust people by their words, not their deeds." It was a lesson for our entire community. Detective Rodriguez received praise from the police department for solving the complex case. In an interview, she said, "Domestic violence can hide behind any facade, even the most respectable one. It is important to believe the victims and carefully examine all the details, even if they seem insignificant." Sarah never saw Bruce again. When her lawyer asked if she wanted to receive a letter of apology from him, she replied, "No. Some things cannot be fixed with words. He stole 9 years of my life and almost killed me. I don't want to hear anything from a man who locked me in a basement like an animal." Sarah Miller's story has become a warning to many. The pastor's model family turned out to be a cover for systematic deception and control, and the woman who miraculously survived became a symbol that even after the most difficult trials, it is possible to start life anew. But some wounds never heal, and Sarah knew that she would never regain the trust she had lost in that church basement.